Hi folks, it's Jackson Crawford here. I just wanted to say a few words about how to format your translation requests in such a way that I can most usefully address what you're looking for from the translation you're requesting. Doing translation requests from English or other modern languages into Old Norse is a service I provide to Patreon supporters, but it is a sort of complicated process and more complicated than you might expect it to be. So first of all, if you have a translation request you've come up with and it's not something egregiously long, email my assistant Stella Bostwick at admin@jacksonwcrawford.com. And then on my Patreon page, patreon.com/NorsebySouthwest, you'll see me post all of the requests from the past week on a given Wednesday. So a couple things that can make this easier for me. One surprising thing is if you include the same text that you want translated into Old Norse in multiple different languages, if possible. That lets me see different sort of angles, if you will, of information that I'm not going to see otherwise. So for example, say you want me to write I'm crazy in Old Norse for you. Well, in English, we don't have to think about the gender of the person saying that, but in Old Norse, we do, because crazy is going to be different depending on if it's a man or a woman saying it. So if you don't necessarily know to anticipate that, I'm just going to have to guess based on maybe your name or something what gender you might want. But of course, you might want it for a character to be saying in your book, and it might have nothing to do with your gender. So another thing you can do to provide me some more context is if you know Spanish, say, you can say I'm crazy or soy loco, right? Then I know, okay, so it's supposed to be masculine, right? So including any other language that you might know really helps. I can read most European languages fairly well, so anything kind of helps. All right. Another thing is even if you can include another language, especially if you have adjectives, it really helps me to know who those adjectives are about, right? So for example, let's just stick with a crazy theme. If you want me to translate crazy and wild and fun, say, all right, I can look at those, but Old Norse has to give those a referent in the form of what gender and what number they are. So I need to know that these are descriptions of multiple men, or descriptions of one woman, or descriptions of a mixed group of men and women in order to actually translate them at all. Because otherwise, basically, I have kind of a root, but I don't have a full word in Old Norse, if that makes sense. Of course, I have videos that describe the grammar of Old Norse adjectives. If something like that might help you to look at, I'll put that in a card in the top right here. Another thing that helps is if you keep in mind that Old Norse has a very literal frame to it. That doesn't mean that Old Norse can't discuss things symbolically or metaphorically, but its symbols and metaphors tend to be very different from ours. And when speaking symbolically or metaphorically, there is still a tendency to use kind of physical language about it. Think about the way that Havamal is phrased, right? If you go through that poem, you really don't see anything like you should be disciplined, you should be hospitable, right? You don't see this sort of like it's not an abstract discussion of these virtues as things in themselves. Rather, it discusses what a hospitable behavior is, what an honorable behavior is, what a moderate behavior is, without using words like moderation and hospitality and even virtue, right? So the more literally you can phrase something, the more likely I'll be able to give you exactly that in Old Norse. Old Norse also doesn't tend to use a lot of the passive, so the more active you can make something, the better. For instance, you're less likely to see something in Old Norse like, I am undefeated, than no one can defeat me, or no one defeats me, or something like that. And in a similar vein, Old Norse is not very inclined to use to attribute action to things that don't have action. All right. So for example, in English, it's acceptable for me to say something like, his hospitality warmed my heart. But in Old Norse, you'd be more likely to say something like, the good host warmed my heart, right? Because Old Norse is reluctant to make something that isn't actually able to act, that is a human or an animal or a god, the subject of a verb. All right. Also keep in mind that when you're making requests, it really helps if you tell Stella that you are a Patreon supporter. Stella can't access that information as quickly as I can, so it can make this process a lot faster. Of course, thousands of requests come in every month that are from people who, are not Patreon supporters or not otherwise, I don't know, supporting these endeavors in any way. So distinguishing yourself as a Patreon supporter is really helpful. All right, well, folks, thank you very much for your support. I hope this has helped you phrase translation requests in the future. And for now, from my office in beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.